Okay, so we have Kokolakis with Aruba Regard. The floor is
Yep.
all yours.
McLean, Chapman, how are you?
I'm doing good. Morning, Ruben.
Look, guys, in these episodes on Untold, something that just struck my mind is how important it's mental health in pro sports. For you as a producer, as a creators, do you want to portray this? Because all of these athletes are under a lot of pressure, and they have to balance their success with personal life and other things that they're going through. This is the thing that I have in common with all the episodes and all the documentaries. How did you create this and create this balance and let them open about the situation that they went through?
Yeah, I think for Untold, like one of the most important things for us is like to really get inside the mind of these athletes. And I think, we're less interested in wins and losses and points scored and touchdowns made, but like really what like who are the humans at the center of the story and what has been their experience both externally but internally. And I think allowing athletes like these really long form interviews that take place over 2 or 3 days to really open up and share allows them to be introspective and kind of oftentimes work through a lot of their experiences and try and make sense of what they've been through. And so I think that naturally leads towards like these really raw and revealing interviews.
I think what's also interesting is like, when you look at like the demographic of the athletes in which we normally are doing an Untold on, they range from the age of they're I'd say on the young side, they're probably in their early 30s, but all the way up to athletes in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s now. And I just don't think mental health was necessarily something that was really talked about in their careers. I think athletes today are much more comfortable talking about it. And I think that sporting organizations talk about it much more. But it's interesting, when you interview an athlete for 2 or 3 days and, they played back in the 90s or the early 2000s, mental health was not something that was really openly discussed. So in many ways, this is really like the first time that they're having a retrospective look at their career and their accomplishments and are willing to kind of talk about what the mental game was, the mental torture is sometimes. So it leads itself to very interesting conversations with them.
But also when I see the episode with Hall of Shame, I see that many athletes also fall because they want to succeed so bad and want to stay in the game that they like 20 years ago, we didn't have this issue with steroids since Mark McGuire and everything with Sammy Sosa. And now we have this story about Balco. And I think it's super interesting because we're looking at another side of the story. We have Jake Paul, we have all the success of college football. And now we have something that's kind of villain in the history of sports. And I love that how you guys work on it. And how was the process, creating this documentary about Balco and Victor Conte?
Yeah, I think like from on the outside perspective, like it's obviously very easy to villainize cheaters in sports, but I think we kind of wanted to go a step further and understand how athletes kind of make that turn to the dark side and how someone like Victor made that turn to the dark side. And ultimately, I think what that does is like it humanizes them in a way, and where they're not just a 2D villain, but they're human beings with complex desires and goals and dreams. And I think you really, from the athlete's point of view, from like Tim Montgomery, you kind of see a heartbreaking story of someone who was like willing to do anything to achieve greatness and was consumed by that. And then with Victor's just like an eccentric character that kind of plays by his own rules. He's not necessarily a bad person. He just is fixated on trying to create the perfect athlete by any means necessary. And if that includes steroids, it includes steroids.
Even with Jake Paul, I loved how do you portray the person that we see outside is not the same person that he actually is, because he grew up and with no money, and now suddenly he see with all this success and he want to do so many things. How was the approach with Jake Paul and create this delicate portrait of his life without being a scandal?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I think that like I knew a little bit about Jake Paul, and I knew more about his brother Logan, and I knew them as YouTube provocateurs. You know, I knew them as like the controversy that they created, and that's kind of where I had categorized them in my brain. And like everyone else in 2023, I was scrolling on Instagram and I started seeing these knockout highlights from Jake Paul, and my jaw was kind of on the floor. I was very like shocked and impressed with how hard Jake Paul threw a punch. And I know that sounds odd, but that was my first just light bulb moment of like, there might be something interesting to tell here. And from the perspective of Untold, celebrity boxing has always been something that's interesting. That dates back to the 80s and 90s. Something like even recently seeing the Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg fight that might happen or might not happen. But really what I think is so fascinating about the Jake Paul story is that he really is at the forefront of influencer boxing, but he's the interest that he can draw, the amount of money he can draw, how open he is at his business acumen and methods of playing a villain, getting people to hate him, getting people to pay to watch him to get knocked out. To me, that was all just like a very interesting ground to make a documentary, and it's currently unfolding. So many of our Untold stories are stories that happened in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. What was really exciting for us with the Jake Paul story is we got to get cameras on the ground and watch this story unfold in real time. It was so exciting.
Extraordinary work. Thank you so much for your time, and I loved it. Everything, I loved it.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Have a great day.
Bye-bye, you too.